Hi everyone and welcome to HujiProductions. Today I'm going to talk about fuel gauges. Now they do cause a few issues sometimes, and there's a few people ask questions about them on Facebook groups and forums, and I've just had to fix this car, and I thought I'd share with you the process that I went through to find out what the fault was. So I think when you're fault finding, there's three things that are really useful. One is a logical approach, trying to break the problem down and trying to isolate each part so you can test them individually. Secondly is to have some good useful tools. So this is a digital multimeter and this is a slightly older school analog multimeter. Plus the third thing is some knowledge. So these are the old wiring diagrams from the original owner's service manual, and this is a diagram that I've put together to try and describe exactly what all the parts are of the system. So if we take this one and have a quick look at it, the fuel gauge is quite a simple circuit really, and I'll try and hold this camera a bit steadier than I am. So you've got battery providing a voltage source, switch through the ignition, through a fuse, voltage stabilizer takes the voltage down to somewhere about 10 volts I think on average, and then you've got a fuel gauge which essentially is an ammeter, and the fuel sender which is a variable resistor. So depending on which height that float is at will depend on the resistance here, and the lower resistance the higher the current and the more your fuel gauge will go up. So once you've popped the speedo out, you can get to the voltage stabilizer here. The green wires here, where are they? They're there. The green wires there. Let me hold this camera so you can see a bit better. The green wires here are the ones that come from the fuse via the ignition switch. So these are only on when the ignition's on. This green wire here is the output of the stabilizer, and that feeds down the back down here. Oh, that's going to move that round down to one end of the gauge. So this is your ammeter. The other end of the gauge is this green and I can't even see what colour it is, green and black wire, and that's the one that goes to the fuel sender. So this is the one that goes to your variable resistor in the fuel tank. So first things first, and why do these always fall out all the time? I've actually labelled them up now because I got fed up of trying to remember which hole they went in. So first thing to check is that when the ignition on, you get a voltage here. So I've set the digital multimeter to read DC volts here. I've connected the negative side of the meter to the car body, and I'm going to probe. I can work out how to do this with the red one onto this connection here, which is your switched ignition wire. So at the moment we've got no volts. Try and wedge that in. Sorry about the terrible camera work. I'm now going to switch ignition on and try not to short everything out. I think I'm going to have to do that a bit more safely. Okay, so you have to be really careful when you're doing all of this, because you don't want to short stuff up. So you don't want to short voltages to the car body. So I've put some insulating gloves there as a temporary measure, and I've got my meter set up still, and I'm going to turn on the ignition and try and hold the positive of the meter on there, and I can now see that I've got about 12 volts at the voltage stabilizer. So we know we're getting a supply to it. So next we want to make sure that we're getting an output from it. So I'm connecting on the other side, and I can get these wires out of the way. What you see is the voltage is there for a while, and then goes again. Right, so I've connected the analog meter up because you can see what's happening a bit better. So you can see that now the voltage stabilizer has warmed up. It is kind of oscillating on and off, and I think it's got a bimetallic strip in there that warms up and conducts and then doesn't conduct, so you get an average voltage. So it's on the 50 volt scale, so it's hovering about between 8 and 10 on that, but it's doing its job. It's also best not to leave the ignition on too long without it actually running, in case the coil's on permanently. So only do that for a short while at a time. If anybody knows more about these voltage stabilizers, please let us know. I must admit, I've never had one apart or really looked into it. I've just sort of been aware that it's a thing that exists to give you a more stable reading on your fuel gauge, and in some other cars they also feed the temperature gauge. So I'm now going to check that the fuel sender, which is your green and black wire on the gauge, I've disconnected that from here, and I'm going to measure the resistance between this and the chassis of the car, because that sender is a variable resistor, so you should see a resistance there. So I've got one side connected to the earth of the car, or the body of the car, and I've got the multimeter set to ohms, and it actually auto ranging on this, and then I'm going to connect that, and we get about 200 ohms, which means that there is a complete circuit. When I was testing this before, this was mega ohms and pretty much open circuit, so I knew there'd be an issue between this wire here and the other end of the fuel sender. But now I fixed the fuel sender, which I'll show you in some other video later. I get a good resistance there. So just to recap, I checked that I was getting a 12 volts at the input side to the voltage stabilizer, a bit less after the stabilizer, and then I've checked the resistance of the fuel sender by measuring between this point here and the car body. So if at this point, when you've taken this wire and measured that resistance, if it's very high resistance or open circuit, that means that either this wire is broken or there is an open circuit in the fuel sender. The connection here occurs by the screws holding the fuel sender onto the body of the fuel tank. Right, so going in where the spare wheel would go on top of the fuel tank is where the sender is, and I'm going to pop the wire off here. I've got the gauge, the multimeter set to resistance. I've got one end on the body chassis, and if I probe on the actual sender, then we've got our 200 ohms. So that's directly on the sender to the body of the car. So if that was showing open circuit, then you'd know it's the sender. If it was showing a good resistance, but previously when you looked at the other end of that sender wire, the other end of this wire at the speedo end, if that was open circuit but this is measuring good resistance, then you'd know it's the wire. So the wiper part here connects to the main body of the sender on that hole there, which is really crowded up and giving a high resistance. And also looking at the holes in the body, you can see it doesn't roll away. You can see that in here, the holes where it bolts through and connects to the earth of the car, that's also very corroded. So I'm hoping if I clean everything up I can get it to start working again, because it did used to work. Okay, so I've cleaned up that little bush there. I've cleaned up that bit where it goes onto it, and I've cleaned up the top of the plate and all round the holes. So I've refitted the so let's get that back out of the way. No, okay, that just likes being there. So I have refitted this unit back together and put the plastic body with the resistive wire back on, and you put this clip here back on so it's underneath, and it catches underneath little shapes in there. And just to finish off today, I'm going to push my luck and see if the car that hasn't been starting very well for a very long time is going to play ball today. It has started a few times recently, so I'm hoping I've sorted it out. Right, we'll put the ignition on, we'll listen to the fuel pump priming up. Should see the fuel gauge move a little bit. It's not got a lot of fuel in, but hopefully that will move up slightly. And we'll give it a go. Check it's not in gear. See that the fuel gauge has moved off the empty now, and the car started, so very happy about that. You can see the fuel gauge slowly moving back down to its off position.